Hello, I'm Steve Altition, Director of Client Partnerships at Pacific Cascade Legal. And today we have our founding attorney, Louis Landerholm, with us to talk about what people are most concerned about going into a divorce. So, Louis, how you going today?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a busy time, but that's good. That works out.
Yeah.
So, this is a great one I wanted to talk about because I actually get this question from a ton of people that I talk with. And it's just what, sort of hopes, dreams, concerns do folks have? And you're the person to talk to because you must have done 1,000 of these initial consultations. And so I just kind of thought we'd talk a little bit about, you know, maybe some of the concerns that you can share that you kind of commonly see come up, and especially, of course, about their divorce. And I'm just going to start with this, and we can go from here. But I know one that I get a lot, and this is even from just people, in the street, is the financial ruin. Oh my God, I'm going to lose an income. We're going to go down to one. I'm going to lose my retirement, my savings account. I just won't be able to afford, the lifestyle I had. Do, is that something people talk to you about or are concerned about?
Yeah, all the time. And I mean, it comes on both sides of the equation. The party who, potentially was the higher wage earner, but especially, somebody who, maybe has been a stay-at-home parent or, hasn't had the same sort of earning capacity during the marriage itself. It's a huge concern. When you've had two incomes, I think the statistics are that you essentially have to learn to live on about 40% more or less income, regardless of who you are in the divorce. So it's a big deal. You've got to set up two households. You have to figure out how to take care of, the kids with less money and, retirement planning that had been going on for years can be disrupted for sure. So it's one of, a huge concern, of course, for anybody going through a divorce. And so it's one of the key things that we talk through at the beginning, from the very beginning, in a strategy meeting of just, what do we need to do to make sure that our client can have the best possible outcome so that they are the most secure coming out of it? Which experts do we need to get involved? Do we need somebody who's a financial planner and analyst who can help them plan for the future? So that's probably the number one concern that people have as they embark on thinking about divorce.
Yeah. I imagine that there's people, I mean, even right off the bat, at the very first thing, what should I really keep, my house or my retirement? I mean, it's too soon to make a decision, but I think that really gets to people is like needing to know they'll have something.
Right. Yeah. Because it is, I mean, for most people, their largest assets are those two pieces, right? I mean, you've got your, house that, you hope that has a decent amount of equity, and then you've got a retirement account and trying to, figure out who's going to keep what, or is the house getting sold? I mean, all of these are major decisions that have to get made, but, things that we help people kind of think through and understand what the true answer can be and some of the creative solutions. I think when people go to the internet and people, talk to friends and family who have been through a divorce, a lot of times it's very much like, okay, everything has to be split down the middle and, you have to sell, you have to do these things. Well, that's not always the answer. If you end up in front of a judge, that's probably the answer. But we do a lot of creative workouts if people are willing to negotiate and willing to work with each other. There are, other options. It does require, people working together, but there are ways to minimize the disruption if people can do it together.
You kind of hit the hill on the head on that. The right off the bat, the idea of placing into, a client's psyche is the importance of being flexible. And, we say compromise and they think compromise is a bad word. But this is a point, especially on this, is where you can't just be rigid and you have to be working with the other side. And I like the idea that just getting into that conversation right off the bat is sort of like prepares them that you need to be able to compromise, negotiate, and they're just, don't hold to one thing.
Yeah, and it's not always possible, of course, but in it when possible, it yeah, makes everything go more smoothly, and it gives us more options to come up with those solutions that aren't necessarily the black and white answer that everybody fears when
Yeah.
they the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And divorce is not black and white. It really isn't. Now, I know a lot of people are, sort of afraid of the legal process. Again, on the internet, and it could be a nightmare, when you start to, depending on what you're reading. Um, and it leads to, I know that a question is asked a lot, and a concern is a lot is, what is the legal process, and, how long is it going to go? How much is it going to cost me? That whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the unknown for sure, and that's the hard thing to predict, right? Because we don't have control over the whole process. And I talk to, potential clients a lot about, we can only control two out of the five pieces, right? We can control ourselves but we can't control the other party's attorney, the other party, and the court. The court's a
Right.
wild card in all of this. We could be teed up and ready to go to trial, and we find out there are no judges. That's not, nobody has control over that. And so we can get bumped out further. So, we work off of the things that we can control. And so, timelines are tricky because we can always kind of give an idea of what is the worst case scenario. How long is it going to take if we have to go to court, and what does that look like? But how can we pull that forward becomes a question about, again, flexibility. Can we get into mediation? Can negotiations work where we can come up with a solution that keeps it out of court so that you can avoid the cost and avoid the length of time that it takes to get to trial? And that, is directly correlates to the amount of money that a case costs. For the most part, trial and court is the most expensive part of everything. And so if we can get if both parties come to the table and they're willing to share their discovery so that we can just get to the, sort of the heart of the matter, which is how are we going to divide things? And, obviously we haven't talked about the kid component, and kids are a whole different, part of the analysis, but, it bleeds into it too. How do we do this so that, again, we have control of our lives, what this looks like when the divorce is finalized? Because otherwise you're leaving it in the hands of, the person who hears maybe a day's worth of testimony and then has to make life-changing decisions,
Yeah.
for both parties and for the kids involved. And a lot of times it's better left to the parties themselves who know their lives. And while nobody feels good when they come out of it, typically, I can tell you most feel better when they've, come to an agreement themselves and haven't had the court weigh in and make all of the decisions. But like in Oregon, a case can take, a year plus. Typically a year is kind of the long end. In Washington, it can be 2 years.
Yeah,
the process in Washington is harder to get a trial, longer to do certain things, faster to do other things than in Oregon necessarily. But in cost, cost is comparable, but I mean, depending on the issues, it's very, we've had cases that are, people are negotiating and it's 5,000. We've had cases where people are fighting about everything and it's 200,000, like plus, like you see some fee statements and it can get pretty crazy pretty fast, especially with complex assets, hidden assets, these type of things. But those aren't the norms. The
right.
norms are much, much more, in way lower than that high number,
Yeah.
of course.
Well, and
Um,
that's good to hear because you get these things online and said, your divorce is going to cost at least minimum 35,000, and it doesn't have any explanation, and everybody comes in like, oh my God, this is going to ruin me. One of the things you talked about, I kind of want to expand a little bit because the kind of stress of the legal system. How many times does someone come in? I mean, and say, do I really have to like, show all my dirty laundry? I mean, how much bad stuff is going to come out?
I mean, so the answer is always it depends. It depends on what one is there. Two, what the other side will agree to. In just straight negotiations, we can agree not to do full discovery. But for the most part, I mean, judges have seen everything. We've seen everything. I mean, the system is kind of immune to dirty laundry. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
Nobody really cares. We just want to help get the parties to the finish line and hopefully come up with an arrangement that is palatable for everybody. So it's way better to just come to the table with everything because when one attorney feels like the other side is hiding things, that's when things get more expensive, take longer, because now we have to dig. Now we have to wonder, what more is out there? What are they hiding? And that's when things get trickier and more expensive.
yeah. And that's where your, years of experience come in. You know those kind of routes to get to the end. You talked about children. I imagine there's a lot of concern about what's going to happen with the kids, and not just between us, but how's it going to affect the kids?
Yeah. Yeah, and from the very beginning, who's is somebody moving out, and what happens if somebody moves out of the house, right? If one parent is going to move out, so there's a couple things that we talk about with. I always recommend getting therapists for the kids. The kids need to have somebody who is a safe place between in the middle of all of this to address their concerns. That can be really helpful. And then one of the concerns and questions is always, should I move out of the house? Because living together, going through this can be extremely stressful. Typically the answer is, yes, that can get done. It happens all the time. We do like to have a parenting plan in place before that happens, because it can definitely shift the bargaining power to the essentially to the parent who is staying at the home with the kids. The parent who moves out has a
Um,
harder time getting time with the kids. So we definitely try to recommend, negotiating some sort of temporary parenting plan, whether it's court order parenting plan or whether it's just a agreed upon parenting plan. That's one of the things that we work on at the beginning, so that you're not starting a kind of an uphill battle to get back to where you were with the kids. So those are kind of the initial concerns about kind of how to help with when kids are involved in a divorce.
Yeah. Um, so how many people come in and the first question is something like, okay, how much child support am I going to pay?
Yeah, that and spousal. So support in general. Child support's a little bit easier because there's a calculator at least. We can go to. Spousal in Oregon is in Washington too. We don't have a calculator per se. It's very subjective to the judge, county to county, judge to judge, factual, set of facts to set of facts. It can vary, and so that's a big concern for people is what is the support number going to look like? And while we have some guidance with previous awards in different cases, there's no one size fits all. There's no exact answer that we can point to and say this amount. We can give ranges, but we need to know a lot more of the facts before we can get into that, and duration as well. Typically starts at half the number of years of marriage, but there's ways to argue one way or the other, either increasing or decreasing. And so it's a much more of a subjective analysis than what people I think realize. And so it's not an easy answer to just, spit out, oh yeah, you're going to pay X number of dollars. I think in general, we've been doing this long enough that we can give a decent range, but there's a lot of factors that go into it that will impact what the final number looks like.
Yeah. And in your initial consultations, do you see where when the concerns come out and you make these explanations like we're doing, it you see start to relief come in clients?
Uh, Most of the time, sometimes there's more fear, but
Yeah.
depends on the answers, right?
Yeah.
Depends on what you are hoping the answers are going to be. But for the most, I mean, that's what attorneys do, right? We see, instead of your friend who's seen one case or the person who knows of five divorces, we see thousands of divorces and across all the counties and across all the judges. And so what we can do because of that is we're applying all of that knowledge to your set of facts. So we're able to say, okay, based on what you're telling me, this is what typically happens in this county, maybe even this judge. If we can get that specific, depending on the experience that we have with those individual judges. But for the most part, once you get that knowledge, it just helps you feel at least relieved, even if the answer is not what you want, at least right? And so,
Yeah.
that's where we help people, even when they're going through mediation, to give them the knowledge, because otherwise you're just negotiating and you don't have a basis for why you're negotiating something versus another position. And so that's really how we can help the most, especially at the beginning, is just to take away the unknown and the concern about how does this complicated process actually work.
Yeah. Yeah. That, the fear of the unknown is massive. And I imagine that some people will come in with a concern that something needs to be done now. I mean, there's something bad going on, and maybe that is true. Maybe it doesn't turn out to be, but that's got to be concerning, especially with kids involved, and if they're already in a bad relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, and for the most part, I mean, the legal process is slow. For the most part, nothing really happens that quickly, and nothing typically has to happen that quickly. There are one-offs, and exceptions to the rule for sure. And that's something that we talk through at the very beginning of a case. But for the most part, the system is built to take time, and it's going to be slower than anybody wants it to be, but it's on purpose so that people will attempt to settle and come up with other alternatives rather than using the court's time to solve all of the problems.
It's kind of a probably a dumb question, but do you find that people are afraid to tell you their concerns? And is that something that you actually want to get out right at the beginning?
We can't help if we don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Like we can't help to alleviate the concern if we don't know what the concern is. So yeah, a lot of it is like, what questions, what are you trying to figure out at the beginning? So that that's a question I ask all the time is, what can I help you figure out as you're trying to navigate this complicated process? And again, just, what are there, because it also helps us to build their goals of what they want to achieve when this is all said and done, right? And so it helps us to know if somebody's biggest concern is where am I going to live, well, maybe you know um we need to adjust what we're asking for and adjust the strategy to keep the house more than we would in another case. There could be another case where people are like, yeah, I don't care about the house. I just want it sold and we'll move on, right? But other people, maybe that's the only house they're ever going to be able to afford to buy, and so they will trade whatever they can trade to keep the house. Those things are helpful for us to know, and we find those out from, the concerns generally, so that then we can help to shape how we're going to strategize the case. So it's the most important part of things at the beginning. It helps us to really understand, where we think the harder parts of the case are going to be, and also what the most important work will be.
So, these clients are getting a lot of information. It's not just, like, okay, this is what you need to pay me, and then I'll start talking to you.
Yeah, no, typically not. I mean, normally we're going through in a consultation, and I'm not getting in a consultation. I can't give specific advice because we're not hired yet, and we're not the attorney for the client yet. But we talk in more general terms. But as it applies to a certain extent, I just can't give advice that somebody relies on to go do something about. But there's a lot of information that we talk about on that initial call so that people have a good idea of how the process works. And,
Yeah.
and cost and timeline is one of those things, but again, those are, there's a big wide goalpost at the beginning for the most part, and so it's really not the most important part of that initial call.
Yeah. I, this one's kind of interesting, but I just want to talk a little bit about, I know a lot of people are afraid of how it will change their relationship with their kids, their spouse, their family. I mean, pretty much everyone. And I imagine that leads to a lot of concerns you hear about early that you aren't necessarily the going to cure those concerns, but you can help them figure it out, who they may need or be helpful to talk to, and maybe not talk to.
Yeah, and that's a big part of any case, regardless of who the professional is. We're making recommendations for our clients to seek out other experts who are better suited to solve those particular problems, like mental health professional. Or, I mean, we've helped people find roofers that where they need a new roof on a house that has to get sold. Realtors, appraisals, financial analysts, appraisers for, appraising personal property items, all of the whole gamut of that you can imagine. And one of those things is helping clients understand that our job is to help them understand how the law applies to their facts. But a lot of the case is very emotional, obviously, and there's a lot of interpersonal issues that are going to come up. And getting a therapist involved is a very useful and from most of the time much more cost effective than talking to your attorney about the same particular things.
Right.
And they're trained to do that. We're trained to apply the law to the set of facts. They're trained to help to work through the interpersonal and the emotional um, difficulties in the case. So, we're always making recommendations as to which professionals to get involved so that people are getting the best bang for their buck for their time.
Wow. Well, we're getting close to being done, but I got one last one. Do you get people who come in and just frankly sit down and say, should I get divorced?
Yes. The the should and the when. Um, And for the most part, I don't tell people very often that they should or when they should. Again, that's more of a therapist type question, right? I mean, what's going on on the emotional side of things, on the relationship part of things is not really for me to say. Now, there are times when, yes, I'll recommend, these are the challenges that you're facing where the law can actually step in and give relief. And so then maybe the question or the answer is, yes, you should. Or we really need to file quickly because, and typically the quickly is more when kids are involved. If there are
Yeah.
certain facts that are like one parent withholding from the other parent, then moving quickly is important. But for the most part, the when and the should is not an attorney question. It's more of answers that are given from other people and other professionals. But just having the knowledge can help people make that decision for themselves. But it's really not my decision to make when I hope people don't have to call us back and use us. I hope that they can go to a therapist and work out whatever's going on so that, they don't need our services. But, when our services are needed, then, we'll step in and we'll help our clients and we'll, fight in court and give the knowledge and help to negotiate all along the way.
Right. Right. Wow. Thanks for sitting down, Lewis, with us today. I mean, we could go over and over. I mean, I imagine we touched the kind of the tip of some of the concerns. And if I heard to say to you, like, what are some of the unusual things that you hear people being concerned about, you probably would have another 25 minutes on that because there's just, you want them to reveal them to you. Um, be, even if they're not, like I said, really involved with the particular case.
Yeah, it's all helpful. It just helps both clients and attorneys be able to, help people move forward. So happy to have those conversations, with clients.
Right. And I assume that, your other thing you do is you make a decision based on those concerns and the potential answers as to what attorney will actually be representing them in that case.
Yeah, it helps us guide like the complexity of a case, where are the issues that are going to be, kind of agreed upon. Are there issues that are more complicated that are going to be a harder part of the case? Do you need more experience, less experience? And so, yes, that's a big part of what happens in that initial call is to, sort of
Yeah.
plan not only what strategy looks like, but who's going to be doing the representation, because that has an impact on, the financials of the case, the cost of, can you work with a less experienced attorney that's going to keep costs down, or do you need somebody who has years and years of experience? Because really is, I mean, we've seen everything under the sun in,
Yeah.
family law, but every once in a while there's still something that we haven't even seen after doing this for almost 20 years. And it's like, okay, that you can't work with somebody who is fresh out of law school. You need
Yeah.
somebody who has those years of experience.
Yeah.
That's a big part of the consultation as well.
Yeah. Well, I hope anyone who watches this can feel a little more relaxed that bringing their concerns to you doesn't make me look stupid, doesn't make me look bad, doesn't make me, not want me. And just, don't be afraid to lay it out.
Yeah, absolutely. The
Yeah.
more information, the
Wow.
better.
Wow. Great information today. This really was important stuff. And again, thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
That's great. And everyone else, thank you for joining us. If anyone has any further questions on today's topic, you can post it here. We can get you connected with one of our attorneys. And until